The Books Podcast, presented by Tim Hague.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Books Podcast. I am Tim Hague and I've talked to some wonderful authors for this series. The Books Podcast includes interviews with Joanne Harris, Ian Banks, Gore Vidal, Helen Lewis, Howard Jacobs and many, many others. So subscribe now on your favourite podcast player to hear them, and importantly, please tell your friends. For this episode, I'm joined by Neil Jordan to discuss his fine new novel, The Well of St. Nobody.
These saintly Christian remains that you find in the Irish landscape, they do cover something much more brutal and much more savage. It was kind of a little conjecture as to how these utterly irrational beliefs could emerge.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
Now, Neil lives in Ireland, so we're talking via the technological marvel of Zoom. Neil, thank you very much for joining us on the Books Podcast.
Hi, thank you very much. Good to talk to you.
Right, this book is called The Well of St. Nobody, and it's got a great first line, which I'm going to quote back at you. You probably remember it, but he had met her 3 times, and 3 times had forgotten all about her. I think that's a wonderful way to start. But it sets us up. Who is her?
I always
he?
wanted to come up with a great first line, you know.
Of course you do, yeah. You want to grab your audience.
In the town there lived 2 mutes, you know. That's
yeah.
That? The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. I went, oh, I love that, you know. But anyway, thank you.
No, first line's vital. But I want to know. Well, I know because I've read. But who is her and who is he?
Well, she's a kind of a retired piano teacher, yeah. And he is a rather august, world-renowned concert pianist. And they have met 3 times.
That's right.
And he is full of the narcissism of a performer, you know, of a celebrity, I suppose. And she has none of that, you know. She's kind of led a rather itinerant life, and she's been 3 or 4 different people through her life. So she sees some justification. When she meets him again, he has no memory of the 3 previous meetings they've had together. And she sees some justification in that, because when she thinks about it, she actually has been different people through her life, you know.
Well, that's almost the main theme of the novel, isn't it? Whether we're different people when we encounter the sort of mutability of personhood. But as you say, it's more for her than it is for him. And she sort of wonders in the course of the book whether he is actually the same person, but she is somehow a different person every time because he's famous and she's not.
I'd say we wonder that about others, don't we? You know, in a way, you know, because if I think of myself, I can think of very few connections to the person I used to be when I was 21, you know, or 22, and to the person I am now, and it almost seems like they're a different being, you know. And they can't have a different history because our history is the same, but they seem different, you know. But then I look at, you know, if you look at somebody like, for example, Tony Blair, who I don't know, you know, but I know as a kind of an image from the media or something like that, he seems the same person, you know. Do you understand what I mean? And I think William, the pianist, the concert pianist, he's kind of protected by narcissism in a way from change, you know.
And it is true that for him, he doesn't have any of these senses of being a different person. I think it's true to say that for William, he feels as though he's the same person that he always was.
Yeah, but he also has a public persona. Do you understand what I mean? And the persona becomes the person, I suppose, in a way. You know, I'm not trying to examine psychology here, really, but I'm just trying to contrast the position or the kind of psychology of somebody who's always thought of themselves as a selfish, isolated article, and somebody else who's always thought of themselves as a mutable thing, you know. It just came out of the characters. I'm not trying to make any broad.
I did wonder about that, because it's also the case that, of course, he's a man and she's a woman. I wondered if there was an overtone of that where that.
Oh, I hope so. I do.
Men are less, less self-examining.
He's protected by his, you know, his drive as a musician. His, you know, sometimes these artists, they kind of have almost this mathematical direction, you know, really, that they follow, and she is not, in a way, and therefore you could argue she's a much more interesting person than him, in a way.
Oh, I think she is really. Now, there's a danger of giving the impression that this is a terribly philosophical novel, which it's not, of course. These themes are woven sort of under the surface into the narrative, which is that where in the west of Ireland, she lives there because she's Irish and she's inherited her mother's house, and then he's moved, as it were, back into her orbit. And you've set this during the pandemic lockdown. So one of the ways in which, and she recognizes him immediately because, of course, he's always been this famous pianist. He doesn't recognize her. And one of the ways that works is that she wears a mask when she goes to his house.
So, I mean, the book is about masks as well as everything else. You know, do they disguise things or do they reveal things? And she wondered, I mean, I just found it a very human dilemma. She wonders, she walks up to his house, she answers an ad for a housekeeper. The book is set in West Cork, actually, which is a very particular environment because there are quite a lot of people in the British media who have moved there or who have got second homes there. Do you understand what I mean? There's a lot of retired BBC producers. For example, David Putnam has made his home in West Cork. You know, Jeremy Irons has a holiday castle there and stuff like that. So the place is a combination of kind of international glitterati and local farmers, you know, a local farming community and stuff like that. Do you understand what I mean?
So we're in this place and we have this meeting. Now, there's no way of getting around one of your reveals that on the third time that this woman, Tara, met William, they slept together. They had sex. Firstly, I want to know if you really think, do people ever forget somebody they've been to bed with?
I think they do, son.
You think they do? And another theme, which is actually a Neil Jordan theme, is the piano and music and a sort of an erotic hinterland to that. You explored this in an earlier novel, Sunrise with Sea Monster. What's that about?
I don't know. I didn't even connect this novel to the earlier one, actually, to tell you the truth, you know. I mean, part of the story was based on, there is a movie called Letter from an Unknown Woman, which was directed by Max Ophuls, and I've kind of, you know, executed a kind of a mild theft of some themes in that book, yeah.
Alan Plater once said to me, all writers are thieves, so you're absolved.
I was a major thief in this. I have to plead guilty, you know.
Well, Letters from an Unknown Woman, that's the 1948 film, isn't it? And it also has a situation where a man has met a woman 3 times and forgotten about her. So that's really what you robbed from that film.
Actually, 4 times. It's exactly what I robbed from that, yeah. And when I saw the movie probably on late night television, but something about it just obsessed me. I don't know what it was. It was the combination again of, you know, of narcissistic obsession and kind of response to a musical talent that, you know, led to kind of an erotic obsession, really, you know. But it's that's where I did rob that element of the story. But I mean, you know, come on, isn't I mean, of all arts, you know, music is the most directly emotional, isn't it? And it's the one that can actually, you know, eroticize any situation in a strange way. I mean, if you look at movies, the minute they add a musical score, you go, okay, here we go, don't you? But it's, you know, and also it's impossible not to have an emotional response to a great piece of music, I think, you know. I really wanted to, you know, rather than examine popular kind of musical forms and all that, I really wanted to examine 2 people whose lives have been spent with difficult, you know, with kind of really serious classical music, you know. And I don't know why, maybe because I'm 73, you know, 3 years old. I was, that's the kind of stuff I listen to at this age. Do you understand what I mean?
And she's, of course, a piano teacher when we meet her in the book. So she is living with the serious music as well as he is. Although, and we'll come to this in a moment, he's not actually living with it when we first meet him.
No.
But before we talk about that, we have to talk about The Well. The novel is called The Well of St. Nobody. And I'm always very irritated when a novelist uses a title that they think is going to sound great, but you could take out of the book and it wouldn't change anything. But The Well of St. Nobody is absolutely central to the story you're telling. So let's talk about that for a moment. What is that well?
Well, I mean, if you wander around the west of Ireland, it's dotted with what they called holy wells, you know, and there's one called St. Bridget's Well in Liscannor in County Clare. I've gone to it, I've seen it, and if you approach these wells, the first thing you see on an old thorn tree are little bits of rags and, you know, bits of clothes that have been torn off that are tied to a thorn, you know, to the trees or holly bushes that, you know, that are on the hinterland of the well. And if you keep walking, you then come across crutches.
Yeah.
And you come across walking sticks.
That's so weird. It must be the weirdest thing to approach.
I can never work out, is this are people taking a piss or not? Or is this a joke? Or did somebody really wheel up in a wheelchair and bathe themselves in this well and walk away and leave the wheelchair there? I can never work it out. You know, it just seems partly theatrical and partly kind of pagan or something, you know what I mean? And it's always fascinated me. And I did study early Irish history in University College Dublin. And I actually did a thesis on a very arcane subject called hagiography.
The study of saints.
Yeah, and the early Irish period, you know, where it was just emerging from a kind of Celtic paganism and all that. And I got obsessed with the fact that there was just a barest hint of kind of Christianity over these real, you know, rather savage pagan kind of origins, you know, and
they're loaded with symbolism and in fact, you play into that. There's a hare that keeps turning up next to this well, and hares are enormously semiotic. They have all these overtones of symbolism. So,
well, have you ever walked through the country and seen a hare? You know? I
mean, no, I don't do the country, Neil.
You don't?
No.
It's a totally different animal to a rabbit. You know, for one thing, it stares at you. And it sits with its two front paws, you know, in between its knees, and it stares at you. It seems to have some kind of magical propensity, you know.
But well, they've always been magical, haven't they?
I basically, the Tara takes a job in William's house as his housekeeper, yeah. And she wonders, will he recognize him? And of course she doesn't, you know. And as she herself wonders, is she going to enact punishment on him for his lack of memory? And he's walking in the gardens of this place that he's bought, but he's never lived in, and the ground collapses underneath him, and there's a very, very deep well there. And he manages to save himself from falling into it, and she invents a story about this well.
Because that's the point. It's not a holy well when we first meet it.
No. Well, I have no idea.
Oh, well, that's fair.
But she invents a story about a saint, you know, and the story grows and grows and grows and grows, and she has to find a name for the saint, which she makes up, and it just, to me, it seemed to be like a little allegory about perhaps the way all these bloody wells kind of emerged into popular.
I love the way you do that. She tells the story and she doesn't believe a word of it because she knows she's making it up out of whole cloth as she tells it. But later on, she tells it to Mary Cullerton in the cafe in the town, and it starts to sort of take on a little bit more substance. And somebody else tells it to another person, and eventually, of course, people start turning up to it, like was it the Well of St. Bridget you were talking about earlier on?
Yeah, they do cleansing rituals around it and all that. But I mean, to me, that I can imagine that's how the origin of certain kind of some of these wells, you know, originated, you know, with just whispering and kind of mad stories, and that then becomes some kind of fact and becomes some part of legend. And you know, I mean, it was kind of a little conjecture on my part as to how these utterly irrational beliefs could emerge, you know, around features of a landscape.
An irrational belief, yes, but when we meet William, he can't play the piano because his hands are afflicted with this terrible psoriasis. And they're all sort of bleeding and blistered and painful. By the way, you do that brilliantly. Anybody who's ever had really painful. Oh, there's a passage where William doesn't want to shave because the water will sting his hands when he washes the shaving foam off.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a personal experience. I did have a ferocious attack of psoriasis for about 3 or 4 years, and I do.
So you really know.
I do play instruments, badly, but I couldn't touch anything. I couldn't even touch a typewriter, and it can be an utterly dreadful affliction. And you can use all sorts of, you go to all sorts of dermatologists and use all sorts of, oils and healing kind of, balms and all that sort of stuff. And one day it just goes and you don't know why. That's what happened to me, really.
Well, I'm delighted to hear it. But if you're talking about healing balms, we're back to the well, because although Tara has made up the story of the well and its healing properties, it's almost as though the well takes that on board and picks it up and runs with it.
Yeah, well, perhaps all you needed was a suggestion, of some kind of numinous power for the thing to begin to heal itself. One doesn't know, does one really? Anyway, that's the story I'm telling.
Oh yes.
He first puts his hands in the water, and his affliction gets even worse, And then she says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, it's not the water; it's actually the moss, And moss does, have cleansing powers, doesn't it? It absorbs all sorts of kind of toxins in the air and stuff like that. So she grinds the moss into a green paint and puts it on his hands, and gradually his hands get better. And he goes, "Oh yeah, okay, I believe it now."
But that ties in then with a sort of sexual reawakening, because although he hasn't recognized her as somebody he slept with before, she's clearly still attractive, because they begin a sexual relationship then. So the healing of the well sort of extends beyond just the physical aspects of his hands.
Yes, well, it becomes something more brutal, doesn't it, and more savage, and that's, I think, these rather saintly kind of Christian kind of remains that you find in the Irish landscape, they do cover something much more brutal and much more savage. But that's the story I was telling, I mean, it's kind of like a rather brutal fairy tale in the end, isn't it? But it's
So you use the word brutal about the well healing William's hands. Is there then a price to be paid?
There's not a price to be paid, but the well does perform a brutal function. I mean, and this is my feeling about these kind of folk, quasi-religious kind of artifacts and kind of elements in a landscape. They hide something quite savage and brutal. So from my point of view, the well, in the story, the well kind of doesn't only represent nice things like healing and blessings and all that sort of stuff. It also represents really savage things like the earth claiming bodies into its own.
Yeah, even when you invent magic, it has a malign effect. I like that.
Yeah, well, that is part of the story too, isn't it? Yeah.
It does work on that level, but of course, then the theme that we've talked about of the mutability of personhood is switched, because bang in the middle of the book, you then switch to a second half in which we have a new character who's done a sort of a Tom Ripley number, a cuckoo in the nest number, who takes on somebody else's identity. So that instead of one person being many people over their lives, now we've got two people sort of merging into one.
Yeah, well, that's it. Somebody pretends to be. Shall I just tell the story? Shall I?
It's a question. I always have a problem with this, Neil, because I don't want to spoil the pleasure of reading the book and coming across the reveals.
Okay.
So, which is,
well, let's just say she is a mother, yeah, know, and she has given a child up for adoption. I can say that, can't I? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And she herself has such conflicted feelings about motherhood, and I found that particularly interesting to examine, because I mean I'm Irish, and you've seen Philomena and all these movies about
yes,
kind of Magdalene laundries and children snatched from mothers and all that sort of stuff. But this is a story about a woman who gave up child for adoption and felt nothing but relief, really, in a way, And I thought that was interesting, because first of all, I thought it was possible, and then I thought it was interesting. And if she was confronted with the facts of her motherhood, and still felt repulsed by it, I thought that.
Well, that's it, isn't it? The cuckoo in the nest, and she expects to feel love for a child that she's given birth to, and she's repelled by him,
loathing.
And that confuses her.
She can't stand the odor of this person. Anyway. Keep talking anyway, because I don't know the rules here about what.
There are no rules. We just talk about it, and with any luck, our listeners go, "Oh, that sounds good. I'm going to give that a go." But
okay.
I wanted to ask, actually, a slightly cheeky question. Why write novels? It's well known that you're a hugely successful film director. Novels are bloody hard work. Why would you put yourself through that?
Novels are really hard work. You know that. They're much harder than films. Well, I mean, I'll tell you one thing. One reason is that they've stopped making films. There's a strike on.
Well, yeah, yes, but you weren't writing this during the writer's strike.
No, I wasn't. No, I know, but it's. I'm older, and people always don't want to make the movies that are right, and I come from a period of filmmaking which you could define as the independent kind of realm of things, like the kind of movies that, Jim Sheridan, myself, Stephen Frears, Steven Soderbergh, that Mike Leigh makes, Ken Loach makes, and stuff like that. It came out of it's a particular environment, a particular kind of wave of filmmaking, and it's getting increasingly difficult to make those kind of films, So
you've made
I just consider myself lucky that I can write a book, But believe me, a book is much harder than a film.
Oh no, I completely bbelieve you. For one thing, you're on your own. You don't get any sort of collaborative input.
Yeah, you're on your own, and you're just wanting this thing to make sense of itself, And sometimes when it does, you feel incredibly lucky. You feel like you've been, kind of washed by sunlight or something, But it's, and actually the truth is, you've got much more freedom in a book, I mean, if I was to make this as a movie, people would say, well, the audience for this will be, whatever. There was a freedom in writing this. And actually, the truth is, I would love to make a movie of this, you know what I mean? But I'm under no illusions as to how difficult it could be.
Oh, well, as you say, they don't make films like this anymore, do they? Or at least if they do, you're lucky to find them. They're all sort of art house things. You don't find them at the local Cineplex.
It's, we live in a world of sequels, and Hollywood's in a real sense of crisis anyway. And I'm just lucky to be able to write a book, because, that's what I started doing. And, it's probably what I'll finish doing. Because,
well, I felt pretty lucky to be able to read it as well. Well, the book is The Well of St. Nobody by Neil Jordan, and it's published by Head of Zeus. Neil, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this interview, subscribe now to be notified of upcoming episodes. And in the next Books podcast, we'll be talking to Mike J about psychonauts, drugs and the making of the modern mind. So please do click subscribe now.
That was the Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. Email Tim on tim@bookspodcast.com, Twitter @bookspodcast, and Facebook @bookspodcasttim.